Hello, I agree with David Cameron. To be more exact, I agree with David Cameron back in 2002. This is what he said. I asked the Labour government not to return to retribution and war on drugs. That has been tried and we all know that it does not work. Absolutely right, David. And here's some more common sense from our good Prime Minister. Politicians attempt to appeal to the lowest common denominator by posturing with tough policies and calling for crackdown after crackdown. Drugs policy has been failing for decades. Spot on. Could not have put it more eloquently. So why, Mr. Cameron, are you now cracking down ever more zealously on so-called legal highs? Now take poppers. Poppers is kind of liquid in a little bottle which you sniff and basically makes you giggle for a bit and then you have a headache. And they're going to ban them from the 1st of April under the Psychoactive Substances Bill. This is going to destroy Friday nights for gay men across the country, but that's not the biggest injustice. The fact is they're clamping down on lots of so-called legal highs. We've already done the war on drugs. As David Cameron said, it's failed. So what the war on drugs has done effectively is hand over an extremely lucrative international business to criminal cartels who are responsible for mounting violence and chaos in large parts of the world. One of the consequences is, well, lots of dead people. I mean, take Mexico. Since this all-out military offensive was launched a few years ago, back in 2006, it's estimated 100,000 Mexicans have died and perhaps 20,000 are missing. These drug cartels there, they operate like ISIS. They do the same sort of videos of people being beheaded and they hunt down and kill their critics. They use child soldiers and so on. Very similar to these terrorist organisations. And the so-called war on drugs has helped strengthen these sorts of cartels in places like Mexico. According to a report by the London School of Economics, the so-called war on drugs has achieved this: mass incarceration in the United States, repression in Asia, vast corruption and political destabilisation in Afghanistan and West Africa, and the spread of HIV in Russia. Now, drug abuse and drug use are far higher than they were than when the so-called war on drugs was launched well over 4 decades ago. What it means, of course, is the government doesn't get the tax revenues from this international business, which is run by drugs cartels. And equally, you can have these impure and dangerous substances that are allowed to circulate. Take Afghanistan. Now, the US has spent an estimated $7 billion on counter-narcotic operations, and yet in Afghanistan today, more land is being used to cultivate opium poppy than when the Taliban was overthrown all those years ago. It's not a secret that a significant chunk of the ministers who are now in charge of the country themselves dabbled with drugs in their younger years. So they're now in charge enforcing drugs laws which criminalise people today for the sorts of behaviour they themselves engaged in when they were younger. Crucially, the people being criminalised for drug use aren't just disproportionately likely to be poorer than the sorts of people in government, they're far more likely as well to come from black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Take the United States. It's estimated there about half of the prisoners who have been incarcerated for drugs offences are black. Now, this has a massive impact, of course, on their futures, whether, how employable they are. People often prevented from voting, infamously, of course, that having a big impact on the presidential election back in 2000 when George W. Bush became President of the United States. Now, if you're a black Londoner, you're more than 6 times likely to be stopped and searched for drugs, and you're 5 times more likely to be charged if you're found with cannabis on you. It's just racism, of course it is. And you get this situation where people are being arrested and charged and even imprisoned for drugs offences. Now, we have legal drugs, like alcohol, which kills thousands of people every single year in this country. But you have other substances which are actually less harmful than alcohol, and people are criminalised for using them. It's completely arbitrary. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Professor David Nutt, he's a very sensible bloke. He used to be the chairman of the Home Office Advisory Council on the misuse of drugs. He was actually forced to resign back in 2009 because of his sensible views on drugs. So on ecstasy, he said that ecstasy was no more dangerous than riding a horse. It was a lot less dangerous than alcohol. And yet, of course, alcohol you can just buy in the shops, whilst ecstasy, of course, is extremely criminalised. We just need to have a rational debate about this. I just do not think it is justifiable to have a policy like the war on drugs, which has calamitously failed on its own terms. So we've got to have a new way of looking at this. Take Portugal. Now what they did is they decriminalised drug use back in 2001. They don't see drug use as a issue, if you like, of criminality, but rather of public health. That's a sensible way of looking at it. I mean, drug abuse shouldn't be treated as something which is criminal. People who are abusing drugs need help and they need support. But of course, they're not given it properly in this country because it's treated as a criminal activity. Or take Uruguay, where you're allowed to buy cannabis legally from pharmacies or grow a certain amount of cannabis yourself. In my view, that's a sensible, rational way of dealing with it. I think the state could take over control of the drugs trade, and that means properly regulate it, get tax revenues from it, make sure impure substances which particularly threaten people's health don't circulate. My opinion is we have a choice. Do we want drugs to be controlled by criminal gangs, or do we not? And we know with these criminal gangs who get all these revenues from drugs and then, of course, they engage in lots of other forms of criminal activity supported by that trade. It's time just to put an end to all of that. So I think David Cameron needs to speak to his earlier incarnation, because actually he was making quite a lot of sense about the issue, instead of extending the drugs laws. So I want to hear your thoughts. War on drugs, do you think it's a success? I really would love to hear anyone justify it, but I want to hear from you. Have you been criminalised yourself for using drugs? Maybe you think my idea is completely wacky, but I want to hear from you. So leave your comments, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.